Car setup guru talk. The easiest philosophy to explain setting up any car across all sims, not just Gran Turismo Sport, is to make the car tripod on the two front wheels and the one outer rear wheel. And it's not exactly a full tripod where, and like on a front wheel drive car where the rear wheel will actually lift off the ground from jacking. That's what it's called when the car front end dives so much that the rear end, the inside rear tire lifts off the ground. That is actual tripoding, but how you would apply that philosophy to other cars is you want to reduce the weight, or I shouldn't say weight, but reduce the loading on the inside rear tire through the entry and mid corner of the corner. And then on the exit, obviously, you want the car to accelerate out in a stable manner, tracking with the steering. You don't want it oversteering, you don't want it understeering. And that's the philosophy. So how do you achieve that? Well, you achieve that with a softer roll stiffness in the front. And there's two ways to go about it. You could use the anti-roll bar, or you could use the front spring. And I'll describe a method of using both to do different things. Basically, make the front end soft, but with the front end mechanically soft with the springs and anti-roll bars, but you control the weight from the soft. Because the front end is soft, it's going to wobble a lot. You control the movement of the weight of the front end with a stiff or relatively stiff firm damper. So I should say relatively stiff front end with the springs and anti-roll bar, or not stiff, sorry, relatively soft. I'm getting confused here. Let me start over. A relatively soft front end from springs and anti-roll bar, and a relatively stiff damper on the front end. So what that does is the soft springs and anti-roll bar allow the car to roll and tripod onto the front end, and then the firm damper makes it so the transition to maximum load is slow. And why do you want it slow? Because of tire loading response time. The differential between the tire loading response time of the front end and the tire loading response time of the rear end dictates the oversteer and understeer. If the front tires load faster than the rear tires, you get understeer because the front end has reached maximum load, but the rear end has not. So it means it has extra grip, right? And then that causes understeer. And then if the rear end loads faster than the front end, that causes oversteer because the rear end has already reached maximum grip and the front end still has extra grip. And you want it to be neutral essentially, so that the front end and the rear end reach maximum grip at relatively the same time. And then you adjust so that'd be perfectly neutral, right? And then you adjust either a little bit of understeer or a little bit of oversteer based on driver preference. So back to setup guru talk. How do you achieve these ideal settings for any given car? I'm using the Supra GR, or GR Supra, to explain this particular mid-front engine car. It has a 52% front weight distribution. So it's very, very close to 50-50, and it performs drastically different from the next car I'm going to show you, which is my car, the Hyundai Genesis. All right, so on to driving this car. Oh, first the settings, and then to driving this car. So I'm going to go to the sheet here. Hopefully I can show more, explain more. Okay, so I've said a relatively soft front end, and for this car, a natural frequency of 2.1, which that would probably put the spring rate at about a 6 kilogram spring. At least that's on the back of my car. A 2.1 is actually a 6 kilogram spring, based on calculations that I took off of what's it called, automation and BeamNG Drive. Anyway, So on this car, it's so close to the same distribution as the Hyundai Genesis that a 2.1 spring on the front here is probably really close, if not exactly, a 6 kilogram spring. And then 1.85 is something softer from 6, probably. I don't really know exactly. I don't have it all memorized. And even though I said that you want to have a relatively soft front end and a relatively, I didn't talk about the rear end, a 2.1 natural frequency achieves what I want with this specific car, and that's in conjunction with the anti-roll bar right here, which is a 5. And I haven't completely fine-tuned this car. I can adjust this between 5 and 1 and 5 and 10, and it may be better in one of those ranges from either of those. I just randomly did less than 10, essentially. I did half of 10 exactly. And on to damping, 67. This is the maximum damping that this game allows for this car. I would generally prefer closer to 97 for compression, as from other sims, particularly liver speed. I like the damping ratio to be closer to critical damping, which would be like 100% was absolute critical damping. And this is just the maximum. And 58, I would like this much higher, but this game doesn't allow higher than 67. But I want the damping ratio between front and rear, I want the rear softer. So what that does in transitional situations where the car is loading left or right depending on which direction you're turning, as it's transitioning into load, the car is stable because the front end tire loading response time is faster than the rear end tire loading response time. And that's what's really critical about damping as opposed to springs. And then once the damping is, or once the loading is controlled and you reach maximum damping, now you're relying on the natural frequency or the spring rate to support the car in the turn at maximum G, and also the anti-roll bars combined. It's a combined roll center, sorry, not roll center, combined roll stiffness, and this is what I've selected for this particular car for what I like: the soft anti-roll bar in the front and a stiffer front spring. And what you might question, why have a soft anti-roll bar and a stiff front spring when you could have a slightly stiffer anti-roll bar and a softer front spring? That's because they do work together, but they also work separately, if that makes any sense. In that, if I have a stiffer front spring and an even softer front anti-roll bar, I'll have a similar ideal roll stiffness, but I get the added benefit of the stiff front spring, a relatively stiff front spring. It's not really stiff, it's just what it is, right? It's just the number that I chose that works well with this car, based off of previous knowledge. And so what the stiff front spring does is that, going back to tire loading response time, is it allows the front end to have a higher or faster response time than the rear. So when I get on throttle, the rear end has, quote unquote, it doesn't actually have any more grip. There's only maximum grip available. But the rear end has relatively more grip available than the front end, so it doesn't oversteer too much. And I'm playing with a controller, so I don't want it to oversteer too much. And if I had a wheel, I still don't want it to oversteer too much. I do have a wheel, but it's kind of broken right now. So this is the philosophy of this car, this particular car. It's still the same: soft front end, softish, relatively soft front end, stiff front damper, as maximum I can go, and and whatever I need the rear end to be to accommodate what I chose for the front end. And this is what accommodates the front end, is the maximum for this game, maximum anti-roll stiffness in the rear that allows the rear end to reach, to have a faster response time, tire loading response time, so it oversteers. But it has a controlled oversteer because of the slow damping speed, or the relatively slower damping speed than the rear. I don't know if that makes any sense, but basically the car slowly transitions into oversteer because of the settings that I've chosen. And that's suspension. And then gear ratio. This is a custom gear ratio specifically for Willow Springs, which at the beginning of the video you can see I was at Willow Springs. Specifically Streets of Willow counterclockwise. That's the one I know best because it's the only one I've actually driven in my car, in my specific car. I've driven it in a different car in the other direction. Anyway, that's beside the point. So on to gear ratio. This I'm going to show on a new sheet. And it's only pertinent to this game, this particular game, but the theory applies to every sim. So I need a customizable transmission, obviously. And this final gear thing is a trick I'm doing specifically for this game. Is if I set this to the largest ratio, I should say the shortest ratio, then as opposed to short or as opposed to long, and I adjust this to the lowest top speed. If you can see the graph there, the gears are the closest possible they can be. And then to get them even closer, which is not, they weren't possibly closer, you can adjust the individual gears like this, so that first and sixth are even closer than they were from the default settings. And then you go back and adjust the spacing to be relatively even. Something like that. Let's see. This is not exact. I'm not spending too much time on this because I already did this. So something like this. And this has a visualization. I'm pointing at my screen, but you can't see my hand pointing. There's a visualization to the top right of the gear spacing. And what that does, what the close gear ratio does, is it allows you to keep the car in the power band more often, even if they're too close. Which in this case, for this specific game, I already know that this final drive and these gears are long enough to reach the top speed at Streets of Willow counterclockwise. And that's what I'm using. And then for the Nürburgring, don't even change the individual gears. Just adjust it somewhere to 3.2 or something like that. I forget what it was. But basically you just change the final gear ratio, and the gear spacing stays the same, but the top speed is different. So that's gearing. And why would you do this to the gearing? Because you want first to be a usable gear, or close to. In this game, it's still not usable, by the way. It's still too short to be used at speed. But it puts you in a position, having the gears close and as close as possible, puts you in a position to where there's going to be a gear available for any given corner that allows you to drive out of the turn without hitting the rev limiter halfway through the exit. And the gearing is basically as important, if not more important, than the suspension. If you have shoddy suspension but it works, the gearing is more important. And then also different drivetrain. Let's just cover it all right now. The drivetrain, basically this is a percent. 60% is not that much lock, but from previous knowledge, like 54%, a little bit more than 50%. What that does is it having the more locked differential as opposed to open or full 50%, 50-50 distribution, is it allows the inside tire to not overspin, not to spin up when it's unloaded, because the goal of the suspension, oh, this isn't the right car, the right setting. Here, let's go back to the other sheet. Oh, there we go. This one. Select. Back down to the suspension. The suspension is to work in conjunction with the differential. And in this case, these are just thrown together settings. They're not specific, but I do know I like the acceleration sensitivity to be around 55 or 54%, something like that. And it works in other games. I haven't tried it. I don't play iRacing. I've played it before, but I don't have it right now. And I haven't gotten too deep into tuning cars in iRacing. But anyway, it works in other sims as well, so I know that my knowledge is transferable. This is all setup guru stuff. I don't have a degree in engineering. I don't have any real race experience. It's all from sim stuff. And brake balance, this is just what works right now. I don't have it fine-tuned. And let's go check out the car based on these settings. I'll make sure I chose the right settings. T1, it's supposed to be T5, by the way. Doesn't matter what the name is for this video's sake, but it matters to me for future reference. Alright, I'm going to do a couple laps, and you'll see why I chose comfort soft tires. So if you've driven this track before, which I don't know if any of my viewers have, you'll know what a pretty good time is for tires that would be available on the market for a track day, that is. Not a race weekend, but an actual track day, driving sloppy. Broke a little early there. Could have gone faster on the bowl. Didn't need to shift up there. I don't know if I want to be in third here or second. I think I'll try second. This is where the close gear ratios allow me to have a choice of gears to the turn. It's not just one gear. I could be in third or second. I'll do second because I have more torque. I don't know if I need it though. Oh, out in the dirt. So if you know what a good time is, a 25 is a pretty good time for most people's tires that they're going to bring to the track on a track day. That's just one lap. I think I got, what did I get? I don't remember. I think I can look at the leaderboard. So 25 is pretty good. And that's on a comfort soft tire. So let's see. Ranking N300. Supra, 24.1 on. I also tried the Expo. I could get into that on another video. It's a different kind of car. And then here's the Genesis. I got a 32. That's with comfort hard tires, by the way. So onto the Genesis. I explained this particular car. And I'll show you the same philosophy works on a different car. There'll just be different settings. And this is the Genesis. Supposedly, this has a, what is it, a 56% front weight distribution as opposed to 52% from the Supra. And stock. This is the stock setting, comfort hards. These are the actual the natural frequencies of the springs on the stock car. This is a 6 kilogram spring. This is a 2.4 something. Anti-roll bar, the car is unrealistically understeery. But the point isn't about the realism of this car. The point is that it's the same philosophy, but a different car, even though in this sim, using the same knowledge on different vehicles. And it's so understeery. I even had, oh, this is This is supposed to be the stock setting, so I don't really know what the stock damper stiffnesses are, but I have no idea where it's going to be. These are my actual toe settings, 0.1 degrees out in the front and 0.1 degrees in the or actually, my actual settings, I don't have adjustable toe in the rear right now yet, so it should be probably 0.5 or something. But this is what I would have. And then the negative camber stock, it's somewhere really low camber. And then these are the gear settings that I had to actually manually select. They're not exact, but they're closest I can get with the game, because the actual stock transmission is not actual stock transmission. Anyway, that's the stock setting, and I'm going to change the sheet to T5. Well, first I'm going to drive on the stock setting, comfort hard. Or should I use the stock setting? Whatever, I'll use the stock setting. This is to make a different point than car setup guru stuff. It's about the tires. Whoa. Tires are way different from before, and the car performs way different than the Supra. Broke a little bit early there. Gearing matches up relatively closely, close enough to be realistic. Oh, too fast. Oh, too deep. A little sloppy. But if you look at the time, 33, 34, that's 2 seconds faster than the time I got in my actual car. I got a 36 something. You can time it on my video that I posted. I don't have the time posted anywhere. I think I had a transponder, but I'm not going to go look up the data. So anyway, tires, these Comfort Hards are actually 2 seconds faster than pretty decent all-season tires. And back to this ranking board, I've actually gotten a 32 on these tires. That's with what is it called, the this T5 setting, not T5 setting, T1 setting? No, T5 setting. I'm getting lost in my words. And I'm going to do comfort softs for this setting because it compares to the Supra that I showed. So the setting philosophy is still the same. Relatively soft front end, relatively stiff dampers, they're still maxed out. And instead of it being stiffer in the front, it's actually softer in the front. Or it's still stiffer than the rear though. The spring rate, that is, but the roll stiffness is different. Basically, this car understeers in this game way too much. And so to counteract the understeer, I've used the same philosophy, but have achieved much different settings. That's basically the point I was trying to make. And it understeers a lot, so I have the braking sensitivity really open. This is a 52 instead of 54. Initial torque 60. I don't know, could be a different number. Let me drive the car with these comfort soft tires. is much more stable with these tires and these settings. I have to brake here. I can brake later with these tires. Oh, this has custom gearing, much like I did to the Supra. Broke a little too early again. This only has 6 gears as opposed to 7 gears of the Supra. Or does the Supra have 8 gears? I don't remember. So it's a 27 as opposed to a 32 with these tires. 27 is not great for compared to the Supra. What I got it. I got a 24 fastest time. 3 seconds slower. But the car is much more stable to drive than it was stock. 2 tenths up. Let's see how fast I can go. I haven't driven this car with comfort soft tires yet. A lot more understeer in this car, and it's just untunable in this game, which the car doesn't understeer this much. Of course I can power oversteer to kind of correct any understeer. 4, 25, 26. I could have gone a little bit faster, but not much. 26, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good time. Okay, so now different car. Same philosophy, just a reminder of the philosophy. Relatively soft front end with the spring and anti-roll stiffness, which is makes a combined roll stiffness is what it's called. And then relatively firm front dampers to control the weight transfer. And then you just adjust the rear. Once you get the right settings for the front end, you can just try all the settings for the rear end to achieve the settings you want. And if you want more oversteer, you have a stiffer rear end, and if you want less oversteer, then you want a softer rear end. Okay. Race settings, change car. Oh, and the reason why you want the softer front end, I said this at the beginning of the video, I'm reiterating it now. The reason why you want a softer front end and a stiffer rear end in certain situations is the tire response time. Again, the reason for understeer is when the front end tire response loads up faster than the rear end. And the reason for oversteer is when the rear end tire response loads up faster than the front end. And actual oversteer is measured by whether or not the slip angles of the front and rear are the same or more or less. But the reason is the tire response time. Okay, on to settings. T1, this is supposed to be T5. That's particularly just for me. The 5, it indicates that it's a a short gear ratio. I have traction control set to 1 because I don't have the fine motor skills to control this car with 646 horsepower with my fingers. I have not adjusted the brake balance. Basically, I just chose this number. I found in this is more setup guru stuff. This is not, there's no research involved in this apart from my simulator experience. Just from experience with BeamNG and Automation, the Car Tycoon game, where you can create a whole car and upload it into a sim and drive the car you just created. I found that this natural frequency, 2.1, it's not this 2.1, even though I have the same natural frequency in another car, it's not the same spring rate in this car because it's a different weight. Natural frequency is calculated by, explained right there on the right. So this is not a 6 kilogram spring on this car, especially with the weight distribution being further in the rear. I don't have the data of what the weight distribution is right now. And these numbers for natural frequency seem to work well and across many different types of car, whether it's a mid-engine car, a front mid-engine car, or rear mid-engine, excuse me, I'm stuttering, a front mid-engine car and a rear mid-engine car, or even a rear engine car like a Porsche. These numbers work pretty well. Maybe this would be at a 75 if it was a Porsche, a 1.75 instead of 1.80. Okay, and these numbers, again, are not, I didn't fine tune any of these. These are just randomly grabbed numbers from previous experience, and not exactly random, they're from previous experience. But I have the stiff rear anti-roll, soft front anti-roll, and this relatively stiffer front end. This is still soft, mind you. This is relatively soft, but it's still stiffer than the rear end. So it's about the philosophy, not the actual numbers, is that the front end is relatively soft to allow the rear end by the anti-roll bars to load up faster than the front end, which causes oversteer. And then the spring rates, they more affect dive and squat. So that's why you can have a stiff front spring and a stiff rear anti-roll and still have oversteer. Is that these mostly affect dive and squat. Front end is dive, rear end is squat. And then anti-roll bars is lateral G's, lateral loads, like turning left and right. And then again, these are the maximum compression damping ratios. I would like a stiffer front damper and a stiffer rear damper. It prevents the car from wobbling a lot, and high load transfer situations. Damping ratio, I wouldn't really go over maximum critical damping anyway, so 96 would be fine. I usually have very similar, in other sims, I usually have very similar rebound dampings to the front and rear, because all you're trying to do is control the weight. It's not really affecting, this is just affecting the extension of the springs. And you can gain a little bit more oversteer, and it'd be snap oversteer if you really soften the, or I should say speed up the rear rebound damping ratio, or make it softer essentially. And it doesn't affect the static loading, it only affects transitional loading. So I just have these really close to critical damping usually. Camber angles, whatever. I'm not going to get into how to find these. Basically you just memorize a track, drive a bunch of times, try different numbers, and see what gives you the fastest time. Toe out. I want toe out in the front so that you have instant steering response at the cost of straight line drag. Rear end, you want the rear end to stay in alignment with the front end, so I have toe in. The sims don't matter that much, but in real life the rear end wanders. I think at dinner time it is. But basically the rear end, I need to send a text. The rear end in real life wanders over bumps depending on your toe in the rear. And you'd want the car to favor stability rather than instability in the rear. 1 second. Okay, and then same thing with the transmission. I did the same thing as I showed with the Supra. The specific things to this game, but also just achieving the closest gear ratios I can get. The 7 gears. Okay, and let's drive this car just to show that it's drivable. So I don't know what kind of tires would come with this car. Maybe the Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2s. I don't have a reference of times on this track with that car, or around that car, those tires. But the Pilot Sport Cup 2s are still street tires. Even with traction control set to 1, I barely have enough control of this car. Oh, too late on the brakes. Oh shoot. That was bad driver input. And I've tuned a little bit more understeer in these settings because I'm using a controller. Oh, too late on the brakes again. Don't have it memorized. I'm going to do one more lap. Probably here. A little bit early. Early's better. Oh, slower. 7/10 slower. Oh, bad throttle input. Oh, late on the brakes, I think, again. Nope, it was alright. Bad line, but it was alright on the brakes. Okay, 23. I have no idea what kind of time this car would get with the tires that would come stock with this car, but 23 is not a terrible time. Maybe it might be terrible for a 600 horsepower car, but I basically just made this video to talk about setup guru stuff, not necessarily about how well I am, or how good I am at driving these cars. Anyway, that concludes the video. Just to sum up everything again, I'll give you a once over. The setup philosophy for any car, any sim, high downforce, well, it's less so for high downforce because you have high downforce, is basically tripod the car on the front wheels and the outside rear wheel, and then control the weight of the tripoding action with stiff front dampers. And that's it. And then you can make any car, as long as you know how to achieve that, you can make any car perform in varying degrees of oversteer or understeer you want. Less tripoding, more understeer, more tripoding. or oversteer. And that's it. Till the next one.